Week 14 of English 120. This week you'll be finishing The Call of the Wild. Read Chapter 7, and then we'll be having a discussion of the entire book in the discussion forum this week. You'll also, in your journal, work on drafting. There'll be a drafting exercise for your research paper. But your main project this week will be drafting your first draft of your research paper. It's due May 3rd. You've received hopefully all of your work back by now. I've graded everything except for what you turn in on Tuesday. It should be ready for you to look at. Make sure you take a look at it before you move forward with the next stage of your research project. You also need to complete your research module Proficiency with Sources. And that is the last research module. If you've been following along, you should be completed with all your research modules. So for this week's discussion, finish reading The Call of the Wild. Actively read it. The last chapter is called The Sounding of the Call. And I'd like you to use evidence from all previous chapters and from outside sources to answer the following questions. London describes Buck's dreams of the primitive man. The salient thing of this world seemed fear. What does he mean by this? Why would that be true? And why isn't Thornton's world filled with fear? Why is Buck intent on befriending the wolf? What makes them break off their travels to return to camp? What does this say about Buck's place in the world? What does Buck's fight with the bear and the moose display about his embrace of the call? Why do you think London included them in the story? What predictions can you make about Buck's future? What does Buck learn from his slaughter of the Yehats? Does this make his answering of the call harder or easier? Explain. Does the book have a happy or sad ending? Explain your answer. What do you think London would say? Who is wild and who is civilized in this story? Explain your answer with specific examples. Do you think Buck would be able to rejoin man at some point in his future? Explain. Compare and contrast all of Buck's masters. What did he learn from each? Which lesson or lessons were most important to his survival, his happiness? Critics write that London was heavily influenced by Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest. Give examples from the novel to support this position. As always, please create your own post by Friday at 11:59 p.m., then respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts by Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. So this week we began to actually draft our research paper. The first draft that you'll be turning in by the end of this week is worth 50 points. I'll be providing comments back on your draft over the course once you turn it in. So I'll be providing them next week. And next week, you'll also be doing a peer review of one of your peers' papers and a self-review of your own paper. Then, our last week, you'll be turning in draft 2, which is actually hopefully draft 4 after you've done a peer review and a self-review, which is worth 100 points. The peer review is worth 50 points, and the self-review is also worth 50 points. So here are the requirements. Here are the requirements for your argumentative research paper. And please note that the dates at the bottom are not correct, and I will make them correct in the slides that I post as part of this week's content and when I post the assignment. So your final paper will be, there's all kinds of typos, sorry guys. Your final paper will be an argumentative research paper that explores the topic you presented in your prospectus and in your outline. Your topic must be arguable, and it has to be related to a topic that was listed in that sheet of topics that I gave you at the beginning of the semester. The format requirements are: your paper needs to be 8 to 10 double-spaced pages. It needs to be written in Times New Roman 12-point font. It needs to be in MLA format, and you can see a sample paper in Chapter 21 of the Bedford Researcher. Please note For online students, your paper needs to be a .doc or .pdf file in order for me to be able to open it. You need to upload the file, not only provide a link to Google Docs. That will not work. You have to have a separate file that you upload. Your overall requirements are: your paper must use at least 6 academic sources other than our textbook or any of the sources that I have given to you throughout the semester. That doesn't mean that you can't use the textbook or other sources I've given to you throughout the semester. You just can't, you can use them in addition to the 6 academic sources that you find. What is an academic source, you might ask? That's a source that's written by someone who's a scholar in the field you are researching. Someone who's been accredited by an institution, such as a university with a high-level degree, someone who's published in the area of this topic, and is considered by others to be an expert. You're going to refer to these sources throughout your paper using MLA in-text citations that are listed on a works cited page at the end of your paper. Your paper must have an introduction where you introduce your topic, and you have a focus thesis that clearly states the topic you're writing about and the position you're arguing about this topic. Your paper must contain several body paragraphs that introduce subtopics that are proven with evidence. Your paper must have a conclusion where you clearly state how you've proven your thesis and you communicate the purpose of your paper. Now I'm going to go into all of this in more detail in the slides that follow, so please stay tuned. The first draft of your paper, pay attention because these dates are not right, is due on Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. So that's 5/3, Tuesday 5/3 at 11:59 p.m. Your peer review will be due the end of the following week, of week 15. Your self-review will also be due at the end of week 15. Your final draft will be due the end of week 16. So let's talk about the basic structure of a research paper. Your introduction should be 2 to 3 paragraphs long. This is longer than many of you have been writing your introductions. When you write a paper that's 8 to 10 pages long, you need a longer introduction. Always begin your introduction with some sort of a hook. You want to grab your reader's attention with a quote that you introduce, or an anecdote, a short story that kind of draws us to the topic, a fact, something that's going to really set the tone for the rest of your paper. Then you want to introduce the history of your topic. Say, for instance, you're writing about the 1906 earthquake. Describe for us when the earthquake took place exactly, what day of the week it was, what time of day it was, what destruction followed, and what it was like for people who experienced it. Same thing if you're talking about a topic like child labor. You want to talk about the history of child labor leading up to the point where you're going to introduce your own specific argument. And that's where you're going to state your thesis clearly. Remembering that your thesis is a complex enough statement that it will take 8 to 10 pages to answer it. Your body paragraphs are the next 5 to 10 paragraphs. You should be thinking about choosing subtopics to talk about in each of these paragraphs. Each body paragraph set, so for each subtopic you should be writing 2 to 3 paragraphs. And remember, a body paragraph in an academic paper should be at least 8 to 12 sentences long. Each body paragraph should introduce the subtopic with a topic sentence. Then make claims about points in regards to these subtopics, and use evidence from your sources to support these claims, and then interpret those sources, the statements of the sources, and relate all that information back to your thesis statement. Typically, for each subtopic, you need at least 2 to 3 quotations to make your points. After your body paragraphs, you want to address counter arguments. These are the other side of the topic. Say that you're arguing that child labor should be abolished because it harms both the education and health of children. There are counter arguments, believe it or not, to this subject, including the fact that in some families where children work as child laborers, the family may starve if they don't send their children to work. So you'd have to address that in your counter argument paragraph. But if you're writing about something where you want to address the counter arguments as you talk about your subtopics, that's also okay. You can do so. You can integrate your counter arguments as part of your body paragraphs as well. It's your choice. Finally, you're going to end with a conclusion. Again, your conclusion should be approximately 2 paragraphs long. You're going to restate all of the main points that you've made throughout your paper. You're going to restate the evidence that you've used to prove your points. And you're going to end by reinforcing your message and sharing your final thoughts on the topic. No, I believes or I feel. Show us what you mean by using your strong voice as a writer. Finally, as an additional page, not to be counted in the 8 to 10 pages, is your works cited page. Please provide correct citations for all sources you referred to in the paper. Citations must follow correct MLA format. See Chapter 20 for MLA Formatting Guide. There's a sample works cited page found on page 367. For drafting your introduction, if you did your research prospectus correctly, much of the work for your introduction was done when you created your topic history in your prospectus. An introduction should grab your reader with a hook, introduce your topic, frame your argument, and clearly state your thesis. See pages 249 to 253 in the Bedford Researcher for details on how to write an effective introduction. When you draft your body paragraphs, you want to use your outline to draft your document. Translate your bulleted list of topics into full sentences. And don't be afraid to change the order of your ideas if you need to while you're drafting. Remember, you want to pick the best order of topics in order to convince your reader of your argument. Draft effective paragraphs by focusing on a central idea. Paragraphs should have a topic sentence in which you make an assertion, offer an observation, or ask a question. Then you want to follow a pattern in your paragraph. Typically, your pattern is topic sentence, make a first assertion, use evidence to support that assertion, clearly state how the evidence supports your statement, give another assertion, use evidence to support that assertion, interpret evidence to show us how it proves that assertion, and then summarize how all of this information helps you prove the central idea of the paragraph and how that central idea helps prove your thesis statement. Support the points you're making by supporting it with evidence from a source. Whenever you use evidence from a source, you will introduce your source by naming the author, establishing his or her authority on the topic, and using attributions such as according to Jack London and his depiction of child labor in The Apostate, right? Or Jack London claimed, or Jack London expressed. So these words are words that you use to introduce a quotation. You're always going to contextualize your quotation before and after you use it. Finally, at the end of your body paragraph, the final sentence should draw a conclusion based on the evidence that you've provided that supports the essay's thesis statement. Here's a sample body paragraph where the central idea of the paragraph follows an initial question. So instead of having a topic sentence, the paragraph begins with a question. Given the potential cost, injustice, and national security, why hire contractors at all? The third and fourth sentences use evidence from a source to show the real cost of hiring contractors. The author of the evidence is introduced, and her authority as a source is confirmed by mentioning that she is a professor at Middlebury College. The quote is contextualized before and after the quotation. Finally, the final sentence draws a conclusion that supports the essay's thesis statement. Between your paragraphs, you want to create a flow, and you do that by using transitions. These are the words and phrases that show the relationship between paragraphs and sentences. Transitions help readers understand how one sentence builds on another and how a new paragraph is related to the one before it. By signaling these relationships, they help readers anticipate how the information and ideas they're about to read are related to the information and ideas that they've just read. So you can clue the readers into how the information relates to each other by using these words. So say you want the readers to follow a sequence. You can begin with first. The paragraph can begin with first. The next paragraph can begin with second. The third paragraph can begin with third. Or you can use words such as furthermore, in addition, moreover. If you want to contrast, use words like however, on the other hand, nevertheless, despite, although. If you want to elaborate on something, say something like for example or such as. To signal a concession, something like I admit that or of course. And finally, you can compare something by saying similarly or in the same manner. Or finally, to introduce a conclusion as a result, as a consequence, therefore, thus, for this reason, or in conclusion. Finally, speaking of conclusions, when you draft your conclusion, at a minimum, your conclusion should summarize the main points you've made in your paper and how these points support or prove your thesis. Remember, your conclusion is your last chance to leave an impression on your reader, and therefore it gives you a final opportunity to influence your readers. There are some wonderful conclusion strategies on pages 253 to 256 of the Bedford Researcher. Remember, it's okay to have your conclusion talk back to your introduction. It's a really great way to frame your entire paper. And remember, the last sentence you write is the one that's going to be ringing in the ears of your reader as they finish their paper. So you want it to be a really good one. We're going to focus in just briefly on using sources effectively, since this is a big challenge for many people in English 120. You're going to be using sources to introduce an idea or argument in your paper, to contrast ideas or arguments, to provide evidence for your argument, to align your argument with an authority, and or to define a concept, illustrate a process, or clarify a statement. When you integrate sources into your draft, you're going to, as I said before, use attributions to identify your source. You can see page 263 for a whole list of different attributions to use. Then you're also going to cite your source by providing the last name of the author if it's not already stated. So if you do introduce the author's name, you do not have to list it in your citation. And the page number in parentheses after the end of the quotation. So here's an example. Pamela Koch argues, and the attribution is argues, education reform is the best solution for fixing our public schools. Because I've already stated Pamela Koch's name, I don't have to use her. I don't have to state her name in the citation, the in-text citation. If I did, it would just say Koch space 22 with the parentheses around it, no comma. You can use 3 different kinds of quotes when you're quoting in your paper. You can even just paraphrase, so that's a third way to do it. You can use partial quotes where you just use a part of a sentence or even a single word. All words that are quoted are in quotation marks, and the source information is included at the end of the sentence. A complete quotation is one or more complete sentences, and it's cited the same as a partial. A block quotation is an extended quotation. That means more than 4 typed lines of text. These are indented 1 inch from the left-hand margin, and there are no quotation marks around them. At the end, though, you do cite the source, the same, last name, page number. You should not use more than 1 block quote in your entire paper. If you use more than 1 in this paper, you will lose points. Make sure you're using quotations effectively. So whenever you use a quotation in your draft, you need to first introduce the quotation, then include the quotation, and then explain to the reader what the quotation means in regards to the point you're making in your paper. You can see examples on page 267 for details on how to integrate quotations into your draft. Finally, you're going to include a works cited page. You'll need a correctly formatted works cited page at the end of your research paper where you list all of the sources you referred to in your paper in alphabetical order in MLA format. There's an example of this on page 367. Please make sure you remember the words works cited, works with an S, cited, is centered at the top of the page. You indent for each entry, you make them alphabetical, and for each entry, you indent the second line of the entry or any subsequent lines past the first line. Finally, your last research module is not on, sorry. Your last research module is on, excuse the delay, proficiency with sources, and that should help you as you're working on drafting your paper. If you have any questions, please reach out to me and let me know. I'm happy to answer them. I know this was a long lecture, but there was a lot to cover. Hopefully, after watching this, you feel much more confident about writing your paper. All of you can do it. I can't wait to read what you write. See you online.